This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by the Grim Hollow Monster Grimoire, which is just launched on Kickstarter.
Our friends at Ghostfire Games are releasing this book packed with over 400 new monsters for 5th edition.
Kelly and I love dark fantasy, and this book is offering an amazing bestiary of horrific creatures, abominations, and undead monstrosities inspired by your favorite tales of grim, dark, dreary monster tales.
Not only that, but this book is going to contain rules for how to harvest monster parts and the crazy items that you can make with those parts.
Also, the book is going to be packed with tons of great advice for dungeon masters on how to make the most of these monsters in your adventures and encounters.
You can follow the links below to join in on the Kickstarter now. And now, on to this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin,
and we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel, where we cover everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for dungeon masters.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
In this episode, we're going to be discussing high-level spells that you can choose with your wizard in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Now, we've talked about these kind of high-level magics before from many different perspectives, but today we wanted to take the opportunity to bring all these spells together in one place and talk about how players specifically can make the most of this exceptionally powerful magic.
If you're anything like me, there's a chance that you're already gravitating towards some of these amazing spells like Disintegrate, Force Cage, or Meteor Swarm that can devastate the battlefield.
Or maybe you're like me and you love playing Diviners and love Contact, Other Plane, Scrying, and Telepathic Bond. But today, Kelly and I are going to look at a small selection of spells of 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th level, as well as one rather infamous 9th level spell that your wizard can use more like class features than spells. Many of the spells that we're going to be discussing today have casting times of 1 minute, 1 hour, or even longer, and so they can't be readily used in combat. And many of them also have expensive and costly material components as well. You should not disregard these spells, though, when you are playing a wizard, because the effects these spells can have on your adventures can be utterly transformative, even though you're not going to be slinging them around as you battle demon lords, cosmic entities, and other insanely powerful monsters that inhabit the cosmos of Dungeons & Dragons.
Regardless of if you're an evoker or a diviner or any other school of magic, these are spells that you should be paying attention to. And as a matter of fact, as you're leveling up your wizard into these higher levels, these are some of the first choices you might want to consider when you get to pick these spells. There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling. The first spell that we're looking at today is Planar Binding. This is a 5th level spell with a casting time of 1 hour and a duration of 24 hours.
With this spell, you can bind a celestial, elemental, fey, or fiend creature into your service for the duration of the spell with no concentration. Planar Binding is often overlooked because it's tricky to use. You have to have that creature at your disposal for an hour while you cast the spell, and the spell forces the creature to obey you, but doesn't necessarily change its disposition towards you. They do get a saving throw, a charisma saving throw, to resist the effect, but many creatures like basic elementals have abysmally low charisma saving throws and are probably not going to make this check. Using Planar Binding, despite its expensive material components, you can slowly amass an army of elemental servants. For when Planar Binding is cast using higher level spell slots, the duration extends from 24 hours to a week, to a month, and eventually to a year. Over time, a smart and well-prepared wizard could amass a small army.
Now, Planar Binding could be tricky to use at lower levels when you first have access to the spell, because you need to find the summoned creature and you need to have it there for an hour while you actually cast the spell. What can be helpful is having a friend with you, like another wizard or a druid, who can summon up the creature and maintain control of them while you cast Planar Binding on them. Once you get into higher levels, though, there's a lot of little tricks that you can pull off with other spells as well, which we'll be talking about, that can make Planar Binding truly sing.
One of the things that you can do on your own, however, if you are a wizard, is use a 4th level spell slot to create a magic circle. So the circle lasts for 2 hours. You then cast the Conjure Elemental spell to conjure the elemental into the magic circle, which traps it there. Then you can now cast Planar Binding on the elemental. This elemental is going to be under your control, but it's going to be really mad at you. So weigh that carefully. But nevertheless, an angry elemental that has to obey you still could be a pretty great asset.
I'm pretty sure Harry Dresden uses this exact formula several times in the Dresden File books and uses the Magic Circle, Planar Binding, and Summon Creature.
It's actually a really cool, like, narratively, the combination of these spells is actually so cool that you can actually pull it off in D&D is something that I just totally love.
Me too. The next spell on our list is Contingency. This spell takes 10 minutes to cast and lasts 10 days. You also have to cast along with this spell another spell of 5th level or lower. Also, to cast this spell, you need a material spell component. This is going to be an ivory statue of yourself covered in gems that is worth 1,500 gold. Naturally, we all have one of these lying around.
Fortunately, this statue is not consumed by the spell. It's just a focus, so you only have to get one ostentatious statue of yourself made.
When you cast Contingency, you choose a spell of 5th level or lower, and you decide the parameters in which the spell will take effect. The spell has to be one that only targets you.
A really simple example of a contingency is that if you get hit by a melee attack, Contingency triggers an invisibility spell which causes you to disappear. But you can get a lot more creative with your contingencies depending on how you want this to work.
One of my favorite contingencies that I used with my wizard was that every time that they were lowered to 20 or fewer hit points, they immediately cast Polymorph on themselves, turning them into a T-Rex. This not only made them way more powerful and ready for melee combat, but it gave them a boatload of extra hit points, confirming their survivability in most situations.
One of my favorite contingencies is actually pairing Contingency with Dispel Magic, having the contingency triggered whenever my wizard is incapacitated by a spell. So if I get hit with a spell that's going to take me out of the battle, my contingency is going to go off and dispel it right away.
Regardless of what you decide to do with Contingency, the fact is that this is a wide open spell that gives you a lot of versatility for creative players. If you can find something that you're worried about happening to your wizard, but there is a spell that can help you out in that situation, having Contingency be an automatic casting of that spell, almost as a reaction to a situation that occurs, can be extremely beneficial and change the game for you.
Just be aware that the Contingency spell itself, while it doesn't require concentration or anything like that, the triggering spell still does. So if you use Contingency alongside a spell like Invisibility or Polymorph, once that trigger happens, you will be now concentrating on that spell. So think about that carefully when you're specifying the conditions which will trigger your contingency. Also be aware that certain types of contingencies that require targets or destinations that might be abstract, for example, a contingency that sets off a dimension door, might be open to your Dungeon Master's interpretation. Be careful when you're setting up contingencies with spells that have their own flexibility, and when in doubt, you should be very, very specific about what you want to happen when that contingency goes off, and there really shouldn't be any decision-making that happens on the spot.
Another great thing to fall back on with Contingency, if you're unsure of where to go with it, is you can set Contingency to a trigger word. So you choose a random phrase that you would never really utter otherwise, and have that trigger the spell automatically, giving you an immediate casting of the spell of your choice.
Yeah, so you could have a contingency that turns you into a T-Rex, as Kelly specified, whenever you say the word giggle shorts.
The next spell on our list was introduced in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and it is Create Homunculus. This spell has a casting time of 1 hour and an instantaneous duration, meaning that it's going to last as long as the homunculus lasts. You also need 1,000 gold worth jeweled dagger, once again something that every wizard carries with them. But once you use this, your homunculus is there to stay and is basically an improved familiar. Keep in mind that you can have both the homunculus and the familiar at the same time.
You have to stab yourself with the dagger as you make the homunculus, and it's made with your blood, which is kind of gross, but also kind of cute. It can resemble whatever you look like, and a homunculus is an amazing flying familiar that can telepathically convey what it senses to you at any distance as long as you're on the same plane. So it is in basically all regards Find Familiar 2.0, except you get to have a familiar and a homunculus. And the homunculus can attack. It's not a great attack, but it can do it.
Your homunculus has an intelligence of 10, and it has hands and feet, meaning that there's a lot of creative things that you can do with that. An intelligence of 10 is equal to the average human character in Dungeons & Dragons. So it can understand commands, it can follow instructions, and with hands, it can do a whole bunch of things. If you already know how much we love Find Familiar, the implications of infiltration and scouting that open up by having another creature that can communicate telepathically with you and go, in this case, any distance and scout any amount of situations and then return to you with all that information is really, really helpful and actually almost outdoes the rogue in a lot of cases for sending somebody forward to scout.
The homunculus can attack. Its attack is interesting. It can poison targets that fail the saving throw, and if they fail badly, they're actually knocked unconscious. I think you'd be pretty lucky to pull this off, but it could happen.
A few things to note about the homunculus. It only has 5 hit points, but when you create it, you can give it a number of your own hit points to beef it up a little. I don't know how much of this I would do, but it could be useful and it is an option.
The other thing to be aware of with Create Homunculus is that unlike Find Familiar, the spell is not cast as a ritual. So if your homunculus is destroyed, you can always make a new one, but it's going to be a much bigger investment of time and a higher level spell slot to make it once again, whereas your familiar by comparison can be a little more disposable because it's just a ritual to bring it back.
Regardless of these small facts, the homunculus is a great improvement upon the familiar, and the fact that you can have it alongside the familiar and all those elementals that you planar binded and are now working with, you can have a small little force of minions to bring into any combat situation.
With so many conjured elementals, familiars, and homunculi under your control, you might feel a little overwhelmed, like you need an extra pair of hands to help you manage everything. Enter Simulacrum, perhaps one of the most powerful and controversial spells in the entire game.
This spell allows you to create a duplicate of a creature using snow, but you need to infuse that snow with 1,500 gold worth of ruby dust.
You can create a simulacrum of yourself, or another party member, or any other humanoid creature that you might encounter who you have access to for the duration of the casting of the spell. Their simulacrum is a perfect copy of that individual, so despite the fact that they are made out of snow, they do not appear to be so, because this is an illusion spell. The simulacrum obeys your commands, but has half the hit points of the original creature, and it can't regain hit points naturally. You have to spend gold or heal it otherwise, and it can't regain spell slots either. But otherwise, it's just a second character.
Yeah, as a spellcaster, being able to create a simulacrum of yourself just means that you get additional spells to cast. You now have 2-player characters that you are working with. Not to mention, one of the parts of simulacrum that I overlooked early on was the fact that it doesn't have to be yourself. And the implications there are many, are extremely potent in what you could do with that information. You could kidnap a duke and create a simulacrum that is now under your control, that just walks into the kingdom with you saying, yeah, these are my friends, we're good. There are a lot of implications here similar to that or beyond that I think Simulacrum makes it one of the coolest spells in the game.
It also makes it a problematic spell, because when you cast Simulacrum, now you are effectively playing 2-player characters, which in the social dynamic of your D&D game can be a little bit of a problem, because now as a player in combat, you are taking the turns of 2 characters, which means that you're going to hog the spotlight a little bit more. But also, copying a full-on player character is effectively adding another player character to the party. And despite the fact that Simulacrum is a spell that is available to wizards, My personal belief as a dungeon master is that player characters who make use of spells like Planar Binding and Simulacrum have effectively added additional party members to the party. And so when characters create simulacrums and use elementals, I factor those creatures in to how I plan my adventures and balance my encounters. So if I have a wizard that is using Simulacrum, that wizard is 2 characters now, and I create my encounters according with that. That is my opinion, because I feel that Simulacrum is too powerful otherwise.
I will say that with Simulacrum being such a powerful and potent spell with a lot of implications for how it can work in the games of Dungeons & Dragons, if you are thinking of picking up this spell, talk to your Dungeon Master to make sure that it doesn't completely derail everything that they have planned. A lot of newer DMs might not be prepared for what Simulacrum can do, and actually a lot of the spells we're talking about might be hard to manage for a DM who hasn't yet experienced their potency.
And if you have a player character that is already taking too long with their turn for their own wizard in combat, you are in for a nightmare when they got a Simulacrum, because it gets even worse. But that said, it's a powerful spell. I just do, and I love using it. As a dungeon master, I have NPCs that use it all the time to great effect. In that respect, it's actually one of those spells that is more fair when the dungeon master uses it compared to when the players use it. But it's fun and it's cool, and and I like that it's in the game. I just think that it has a warping effect on the power level of one specific player character, which should be accounted for, because it does create some bad feels when the wizard is sitting there controlling 2 characters and everyone else at the table is like, dude, you get twice as much time over everyone else.
Simulacrum is a great spell because it allows you to create a copy of yourself to send into dangerous situations where it could get obliterated, but hey, you're fine. But sometimes you need a backup of your backup, and that's where the clone spell comes in.
Clone is an 8th level necromancy spell that takes 1 hour to cast. You are going to need a lot of lab equipment, though, to get prepared to cast this spell, because not only will you need a diamond to start growing the clone, you're also going to need a vat or a tank in a lab that is worth 2,000 gold pieces to even get started casting the spell. And you're going to need a cubic inch of flesh. So have fun deciding what part of your body you're going to cut off to get this thing started. Once you've cast the spell, the clone actually takes 120 days to mature. So you might want to play it safe while the backup starts loading. Thereafter, if the cloned creature dies, its soul goes into the inert clone, which is stored basically in stasis. So rather than being like a science fiction-y sort of clone where it's making a copy, the clone spell is more like having an extra body for your soul to fly into.
This spell is the ultimate insurance policy. You can go running into battle and go into the most dangerous situations in D&D, feeling much better if you have a clone at home waiting for you. If something were to go horribly wrong, you're going to be fine because you have another body to jump into. Not only that, but although it takes 4 months, there's nothing limiting you to an amount of clones. Yeah, you have to cut a piece of your body off to create it, so be careful with losing all of your fingers and toes trying to make 20 clones. But if you can make a few different clones that are stored aside, they're like extra lives in a video game. And why stop there? Yeah, you can make multiple clones of yourself, but if you're going into the most dangerous situation in the campaign so far, it might be worth it to create a clone of the entire party. That way, if there's a total party kill, guess what? It's no problem.
Downside of the clone is that the clone wakes up buck naked. And so you're going to lose all your equipment because it's going to be sitting there with your original dead body. However, there is a clever workaround for this in the form of the Instant Summons spell. Instant Summons requires a sapphire worth 1,000 gold pieces, and it links an item to the sapphire with an invisible indicator. Thereafter, the sapphire can be crushed, and the item is teleported from wherever it might be into your hand. So what do? Take your 2 most important possessions, maybe your Staff of Power and your Robe of the Archmage, and cast Drawmage's Instant Summons on both of these, and place the sapphires in the hands of your clone. So when you wake up in your clone body, you immediately crush the sapphires and have your 2 most valuable magic items right in your hands.
Using this same idea, you could leave a bunch of equipment next to where your clone is, so that if the worst case scenario happens, you could have a scroll of teleport or a few extra potions or other items that the clone might need to get back in the game quickly. Being able to die, wake up in your clone's body, crush the sapphires to get your most prized possessions, grab your scroll, teleport back to your body, and grab the rest of your gear is going to be a really important and valuable way to continue playing in the game with the items that you were afraid you were going to lose. What a great surprise to pull on your enemies when the main villain of the campaign stabs your wizard through the heart, reaches down to pick up the staff of power that they hold, and it suddenly disappears. And then a few moments later, a naked wizard holding a staff of power appears and says, "Give me back my stuff." Why not?
The only problem with all this, too, is you probably are going to need a pretty safe place to stash your clone and all this gear. And starting a stronghold can be a pretty expensive undertaking, especially making sure it's got the security that if your enemies find out that you've made a clone, they might try to go destroy your clone first. Enter the Demiplane spell, which allows you to conjure up a private little pocket dimension for you to store all of your ill-gotten gains as well as your backup plans.
Demiplane is also an 8th level spell that only requires one action to cast, and it creates a doorway to a demiplane that is 30 feet in every dimension, and you can store all of your stuff there.
Future castings of the spell can actually open up new demiplanes or go back to an existing one already. So the spell is kind of weirdly set up in the way that it's worded, but essentially it's giving yourself your own little private pocket that you can access. Once the door to the demiplane closes after an hour, if you're in the demiplane, you're trapped there. So this is part of the reason why if you're going to put your clone in there, you're probably going to want to put a scroll of plane shift or some material components for the plane shift spell, or something to get yourself out of there if you're so that you're not trapped in there when you wake up again. And you may also want to consider warding some elements of your demiplane with other spells like Guards and Wards or Private Sanctum if you're going to be using that as a private base of operations. You can also use a Mighty Fortress spell for a similar purpose if you want to have a nice base set up for your character.
So a lot of these spells do require costly components and a little bit of time and foresight and planning in order to pull off. But the way that a lot of these spells can combine and be powerful together and help you create a situation where your high-level wizard is really changing the way that Dungeons & Dragons works. You're cheating death, you're pulling in minions from all sorts of places, and you have your own little private bases that you can retreat to or fall back to if problems arise. There's a lot of options here that are extremely potent and have a lot of potential for really powerful play at high levels of Dungeons & Dragons.
Now, there is one last spell that kicks all of this into overdrive that we would be remiss if we did not mention, and that is the all-powerful 9th level spell, Wish. Now, when using this spell, you should be careful what you wish for, particularly if you're planning on using it in some sort of inventive or creative way with some very careful wording. There is no way to creatively word a wish. There is no airtight legalese that you can use to force your Dungeon Master to interpret your wish in a specific way, because your Dungeon Master actually gets to decide what the rules of logic in their universe are. They transcend the wish spell itself. So be careful when you're doing stuff like that with wish. But the flip side is that you can always use the wish spell to duplicate a spell of 8th level or lower, which is now cast as a single action, and the material component cost is completely circumvented.
So with the Wish spell, all of the spells that we have listed in this episode can now be done without those costly components and instantaneously. So it really kicks it into overdrive where you can combine some of these spells together in 1 or 2 rounds. Or you can set up one of the spells and then have another one at the ready to cast as an action instantly. Now, the issue that we talked about earlier with Planar Binding taking an hour-long casting time, meaning that you need some way of having the entity that you're trying to bind there for an hour, is undone by the fact that you can use Wish to cast Planar Binding. So you can summon up the creature and drop Planar Binding on it as an action, and now you're good to go.
That also gets around all the muddy issues about casting time, concentration, material component costs as well. And you may be able to argue that casting Planar Binding with a Wish spell allows you to upcast it to 8th level, so that creature lasts for a much longer duration.
So we hope that with this list of spells, it has opened your mind to the potential of high-level wizards. Not only the power that they possess in high-level play of Dungeons & Dragons, but also the roleplay and story potential that these types of spells can bring to the table.
There are so many more wizard spells that can be used in creative ways. And oftentimes, players might look at the wizard class features in the player's handbook and go, where's all the high-level class features? Well, they're hiding in the spell list. And so it's really important to see what all these amazing spells can do. And definitely for me, whenever I play a wizard, these are amongst the first spells that I pick whenever I level up with my character. I don't wait to try to discover them in the world because they are so good. Try them out in your next campaign.
So this has been a look at high-level wizard spells in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Tell us about some of your favorite game-changing spells that are available to the wizard in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube and elsewhere, please consider joining our amazing community by following the links in the description below.
Also, Season 1 of our live play Dungeons of Drakkenheim is coming to Kickstarter. We've partnered with Ghostfire Games to bring this campaign to life as a 5th edition module. You can follow the links below or go to DRAKKENHEIM.com to join the mailing list to be up to date on all the news involving this Kickstarter. But the stories of Drakkenheim are still continuing, so check out our live play on Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/dungeon_dudes. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we've talked about a lot of spells for wizards in previous episodes. Check out the playlist of those right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time
in the dungeon.